Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today on this Christmas Eve, we'll speak with the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, co-chair with Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the co-director of the Theoharis Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. Having spent the past 2 decades organizing amongst the poor in the United States, she's the author of Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor, and most recently, You Only Get What You're Organized to Take, Lessons from the Movement to End Poverty. Then we'll begin our retrospective from the archives of some of the outstanding interviews this year, starting with January and working back to the present over the next few days. We begin with an interview from January the 23rd of 2025 on the Trump-Musk presidency steamroller of reactionary initiatives flattening the Democrats and intimidating the press into treating a sociopathic felon as a legitimate leader. We discuss a manifesto of persistence, that is, resistance, in order to stand up to the firehose of unpopular outrages Trump is inflicting on the land as he frees thugs and vandals and drug kingpins. We were joined by Duran, a San Francisco journalist who previously served as an editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee and the San Francisco Examiner. He currently writes the Frame Lab newsletter on Substack and regularly contributes to the San Francisco Chronicle and other publications. He served as a press secretary for Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General of California, and we discussed his article with George Lakoff at Frame Lab, Woody's New Year's Resolution and Ours. Then we'll go to an interview from February the 27th of 2025 when we examined the performative nature of Musk's evisceration of the U.S. government under the pretext of cutting spending in order to give massive tax breaks to oligarchs like himself, which so far is saving a pittance but is crippling the federal workforce, which appears to be the real intention of Doge. Joining us was Brooke, Harrington, a professor of economic sociology at Dartmouth College, a certified wealth manager and an advisor to the OECD and the European Parliament, among other organizations. She's the author of several books, including the best-selling Capital Without Borders. Her latest book is Offshore, Stealth Wealth and the New Colonialism. And she has an article at the New York Times we discussed, Trump is like FDR, only in reverse. And before we begin, as this year ends and you can make tax-deductible donations for 2025, I'm hoping you consider backgroundbriefing.org/donate and publictruthmedia.org for your charitable giving, since we produce a daily news analysis program covering the major stories in the news 5 days a week on a very modest budget, and have recently expanded our production team from 2 people, that's me and Graham, to 5 employees as we expand our social media presence and have a new Gen Z reporter to engage the future generation in a coalition of boomers and zoomers out to make America decent and sane again, and the world a better place for all. So happy holidays to you, and the very best in the new year as we expand our fact-based community in post-truth America. And joining us now on this Christmas Eve is the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, the co-chair with the Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the co-director of the Theoharis Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. Having spent the last 2 decades organizing amongst the poor in the United States, she's the author of Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor, and We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign, co-authored with Reverend William Barber. Welcome to Background Briefing, Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us on this Christmas Eve. And obviously, things in Bethlehem are not particularly Christian in the sense that there's a lot of violence going on. There are very few Christians left in the West Bank or in Palestine in general. There used to be about 10%. Now it's down to about 1%. But given that today or tomorrow is the day that we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, who was born in a stable. In effect, his parents were homeless. There was no room for them in the inn. How much do you think people celebrating Christmas recognize how much the whole point of the story is essentially about, you know, poor people being born into a world that they are trying to change.
I mean, I think this is part of the problem of the kind of Hallmark Christmas story that we're fed, right? I mean, we hear about uh, this kind of romantic scene, this sweet and fluffy and warm scene of Jesus being born in a manger. And, but I love nativity sets. My mom was a great collector of them, and all of the different, scenes of these cute animals, hanging out with this little baby, and, a mom who just gave birth, um, this holy family, and we have it all wrong. Indeed, like you were saying, Jesus is born unhoused. His family is in, Bethlehem, away from their home, because the emperor has decreed it so, and has forced people through political and economic means to be kind of taking a census and moving across land and sea. And this is what the emperors do, right? They control time and space, and they tell people what they have to do, and so instead you have this family on the run. They don't have the resources to stay somewhere clean and safe and pretty. In fact, they're turned away from everywhere they go. Someone eventually allows them to marry, to give birth in a dirty manger, like amongst unclean animals. And this is the beginning. This is the story of where this leader, who is born to usher in a reign of jubilee, of abundance for all, of everybody in, nobody out. I mean, it takes place in this scene, and this is where these scientists, these astronomers, these kings, hear that there's a baby born, in this little unknown, and unpretty place, and I think it's actually really important. I mean, it's about homelessness, it's about, immigration and migration, it's about the control of power and resources, and this baby is about turning that whole world upside down, and saying that, "No, it shouldn't be that the rich and powerful get to determine everything for everybody, but actually regular people, poor people, unhoused people are the way out of this horror scene." And I think that is true still in Bethlehem today, and in these yet to be United States. I think that this is where the hope of the season and of these times should be coming from: poor and unhoused people who say it doesn't have to be this way, and who then ready themselves to turn the world upside down just like Jesus does.
But Reverend Liz, since you work with the Reverend William Barber on the Poor People's Campaign, the situation now in terms of not so much homelessness, but people that have some form of shelter, most working people pay rent, and rents are becoming absolutely unsupportable. I mean, people are really, I've been hearing anecdotal information about people paying up to 60, 70% of their monthly income on rent. So it goes beyond being homeless, doesn't it? I mean, the division in this country between the rich and the poor is so obscene when you think that Elon Musk was just given $1 trillion payday by Tesla, and he spent 300 million of his own money electing the Republicans and Donald Trump, helping Trump in the last election. And he's gonna do the same in the next one. It's not as if we have a situation where you have extremely rich oligarchs in this country, but they're not exactly neutral. They're taking political power, and that power is being deployed to, improve the lots of billionaires at the expense of the lots of ordinary people, and we saw that in Trump's big, beautiful bill.
I mean, this is totally correct. I mean, I've been doing very grassroots organizing amongst poor and unhoused people for more than 30 years. And the times are that the vast majority of people in this country are struggling. They have been for a while, but they're particularly struggling now. I mean, the reports have us saying that, 60 to 70% of people in the richest country in human history, cannot afford to pay all of their bills right now. And in the last census, before even Donald Trump passed his executive orders, criminalizing homelessness, before he helped to ram through Congress this, big bad bill that puts billions into the coffers of the military and into ICE and the criminalization and militarization of people, and takes, food literally out of the mouth of babes. Before even that, 40% of this country was poor or one small emergency away from absolute economic ruin. And so, I mean, the life was hard, and it's getting a lot harder for the vast majority of people. But that actually is not that different than the story of Jesus in his time. I mean, here Jesus is a undocumented migrant, unhoused baby, born into a world where the 99% of people are poor, and the 1% are part of the Roman Empire that is taking more and more of their resources. And, I think reports came out last week, similar to what you were just talking about in terms of Elon Musk, but where 1,000th of a percent of the richest people in the world have as much money as half of the world's population. I mean, that no one is that smart. No one is that giving that much or gifted that much. I mean, that is just an immoral abomination if you were to follow actually what the Bible says about this kind of polarization of wealth and poverty, and just the difference of the haves and the have-nots, and just these billionaires versus the rest of us. And it doesn't have to be this way, right? I mean, just the single proof that folks like Musk, and this 1,000% of people, these rich, 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 super rich people in the world. I mean, the fact that they have as much resources is because so much of humanity is suffering, but we don't need to have people hungry. We don't need to have people unhoused. We don't need to have people without, adequate health care. The resources exist for everybody to live a full life. And that's what Christmas should be about, right? That actually, if you follow what the holiday is about, it's celebrating, it's lifting up someone who would reorganize society around everybody in and nobody out.
So the Bible says that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the one time that the prophet Jesus got angry was when he drove the money changers out of the temple. So how much do you think there is a recognition of the clear messages that come from the life of the prophet Jesus about materialism, about income inequality, and about ministering to the poor? Because it wasn't just the poor, it was the lepers, it was the outcasts that he favored over the rich.
It's very clear if we look at the Bible what it has to say about justice and about the righting of wrongs and about lifting up the lowly and filling everybody with good things. I mean, that's the content. Now, whether that's the gospel we hear, as Christian nationalists have really kind of taken over the religiosity of the country. We don't often hear what the real message of what the Bible really says about a full and abundant life for everybody, including the poor, um, but but not excluding anyone, right? It's a kind of a lift from the bottom so everybody can rise. Yeah, it's a if we focus on making sure that those that are marginalized can come to the center, then everybody can live a full and beautiful life where everyone can thrive and not just barely survive. I mean, that is the message of our texts over and over and over again. And indeed, Jesus teaches this in many ways, and the Hebrew scriptures teach us in many ways. We have Isaiah saying, "Woe to who deprive the rights of the poor and make women and homeless children your prey. You have James, the wages that you failed to pay the workers, your workers are crying out against you, and their cries have reached the ears of God. I mean, we could just go text to text to text that says that justice is the way of Jesus, and yet that is not necessarily the gospel that is being preached in this moment. But it should be, and it could be. And so if we're gonna actually think about what this holiday season is about and what Christmas Day and Christmas Eve is about, it's about everybody in and nobody out.
The least of us. And I don't know what can be done to counteract Christian nationalism and the prosperity gospel. Do you feel, Reverend Liz, that there is a sort of resurgent, if you will, religious left to counter the religious right? It seems to get all the attention, but I'm not sure it has necessarily has the numbers. And when you look at the big moments in American history, it was the religious left, in effect, that ended slavery, that brought about women's rights and human rights, etc. So, what's your sense of the alignment of power, if you will, within Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I don't talk as much about it being the religious right versus the religious left, but what's at the core and center of our religious teachings. But I do want to agree with you that, I mean, there's a researcher at Johns Hopkins University right now. Her name is Hari Han, and she did some research over the past year or so that really shows that proves that in number and in percentage, that those people of faith, particularly Christians, including evangelical Christians, who believe in justice and healthcare for all and housing for all and policies of social uplift, are in the majority, in fact, the vast majority. And yet, what has happened is that a small but very organized minority has captured kind of the religious imagination of the country. And so we assume that most Christians, including most evangelical Christians, want to attach work requirements to the poor and want to have unjust immigration policies. We assume that, like, the idea of universal health care isn't appealing to people, especially to Christians. Um, but that just isn't true. In fact, the majority of people of faith, and including Christians, really believe that life should be better for everybody. And so then the question is, how do we make it so that folks are able to kind of come together and unite together and build this society in the way that it should.
Well, just recently at the Turning Point USA meeting, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, gave a kind of Christian nationalist shout out by suggesting that white people in this country were kind of beleaguered and they should stop apologizing for being white. I mean, as far as I know, most of the privilege is on the right, is amongst white people in this country, not amongst minorities. And this administration is hardly neutral. It's been absolutely hostile towards, particularly immigrants from the South. It's rounding them up without any due process, warehousing them in vast private prisons that the taxpayers are paying for. The cruelty is evident to all. So I don't understand how we could be in this moment where there's this horrors going on against our fellow citizens, whether they're documented or not. And yet we have a government that somehow thinks that it's white Americans that are oppressed as opposed to minorities who are being rounded up.
And I think this is completely right. I mean, this idea that also that someone's rent or food prices are gonna go down by blaming undocumented immigrants. I mean, it's not gonna happen, it's not true, and who's to blame is those up on top who in vast, vast, vast majority are white people. Now, it is important for us to notice that while disproportionately people of color are poor in this country, the greatest number of people who are poor are white. But J.D. Vance and Christian nationalists aren't speaking to the needs and demands of poor white people either. And in fact, the base of J.D. Vance or Turning Point USA are not poor and low income people, white people or otherwise. It really is the wealthy and the powerful who are benefiting from trying to scapegoat and divide people. And I think about someone like Reverend Dr. King, that last sermon of his life, the night before he's assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, when he's standing in solidarity with sanitation workers, where he talked about how back in the Bible, Pharaoh had a favorite way of keeping people and keeping the enslaved oppressed and in slavery. And then that was to divide and conquer. And so he talked about the need, and at that point, he's talking about, you know, pulling a poor people's campaign together, bringing people across racial lines, across geographic lines together, and to not be divided by the kind of tactics of empire, of Pharaoh, or of this, in our day, this this president and vice president, but instead actually finding unity and organizing across these lines that divide us to be able to push back and build a society where everybody can live good lives, including undocumented immigrants, including trans youth, including women who need abortions. I mean, all the folks that are being kind of criminalized and marginalized in this moment, actually can find common cause and can come together and build a society where we can live good lives.
And on this Christmas Eve, that is, I think, a perfect way to end our talk today, Reverend Dr. Liz, because in a sense, it's a way to, it's a hopeful, I guess it's a hopeful sign that there's more of us than the handful of the rich, and it's people power versus money power, and it, I think inevitably people power will prevail.
I think that's right. And I think that's exactly the Christmas message, right? That sometimes in the places you don't expect it, amongst people that at this point, from the rich and powerful view are insignificant. Uh, there is hope that something else is being birthed. That it's the birth of a movement where um, we can have justice roll down like water and righteousness like an ever flowing stream, like the prophet Amos talks about and Jesus embodies. So, a Merry Christmas to everyone who celebrates like I do, and have it be a reminder that it doesn't have to be this way, and that this is not as good as it gets, but that there is something to be done out there in the world right now, in this country right now, where we can help to bring about a flourishing of everyone.
Well, Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, I thank you so much for joining us on this Christmas Eve.
It's good to be with you.
Thank you. And I've been speaking with Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, the co-chair with the Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the co-director of the Charis Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. Having spent the past 2 decades organizing amongst the poor in the United States, she's the author of Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor, and We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign, co-authored with Reverend William Barber. Let's now take a brief station break. We're back in a moment with an interview from January the 23rd of 2025 with Gil Duran.
He's the man with all the toys. Someone found a lighted house late one night, and he saw through the window a sight. A big man in a chair, and little tiny men everywhere. He's the man with all the toys.
And joining us now is Gil Duran, a San Francisco journalist who previously served as editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee and the San Francisco Examiner. He currently writes the FrameLab newsletter on Substack and regularly contributes to the San Francisco Chronicle and other publications. He served as press secretary for Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General of California. And he has an article with George Lakoff at FrameLab, Woody's New Year's Resolutions and Ours. Welcome to Background Briefing, Gil Duran.
Thanks for having me.
And Gil, of course, you're referring to Woody Guthrie, who in 1943 had the following resolutions: work more and better, read lots of good books, keep hoping machine running, help win war, beat fascism, wake up and fight. And of course, I'm reminded of Woody's song from that era, All You Fascists Bound to Lose. And already it seems to me that Trump, in spite of all of the power that he's wielding, it seems like he's also bound to lose, because already freeing 1,600 of these thugs and vandals who sacked the Capitol and desecrated and defecated in America's citadel of democracy, people aren't happy about that. And there's a lot more to come. So what's your sense of this sort of slow wake up that's happening here, which I think is already beginning?
Definitely. Trump is doing a lot of things that are unpopular. And I think the best thing for Democrats to do right now is to organize around publicizing those unpopular things, making sure they connect, making sure there's a media discourse on them, and that they filter down through every level of society, not only through the media, but through social media, etc. Right now, there seems to be a lot of disorganization on the Democratic side. It's not clear to me who the leader of the party is or what people are supposed to be doing right now to feel empowered and to feel optimistic and to feel like there's a plan. But I think in the next few weeks, we'll be getting our sea legs and getting a sense of what needs to happen. So, we put together our own list of resolutions because we saw that there was a lot of defeatism and a lot of sadness, and that's understandable. This was a rough election. This was a terrible outcome, and it's going to be a tough 4 years. But there is cause for optimism. Trump is doing some very unpopular things. You had Elon Musk throwing a Nazi salute at the inauguration. I mean, there's a lot to work with here, but we have to be organized. We have to be confident. We have to be bold, and we have to be dedicated to making sure that we are as aggressive with the MAGA people and Trump and Musk as they would be if Kamala Harris had won the election.
And indeed, we can also add the pardoning of this global drug lord, the founder of the Silk Road dark platform for drug dealers and crypto criminals. At the same time, Trump's talking about the scourge of fentanyl coming from Mexico, and here he is freeing one of the world's biggest drug kingpins. But as you mentioned, Gil, the list will grow. But let's talk about your list, and let me quickly go through your New Year's resolution with George Lakoff of what we can do. Be brave, cultivate empathy, stay focused, be proactive, foster real connections, avoid brain rot and lies, share a positive message when possible, demand accountability, engage young people, don't help Trump, don't argue with his supporters. Remember, this is a regime. Learn from history, support artists and the arts, take care of yourself, celebrate victories, persist. Well, we're doing our best, and I'm certainly doing my best to be on the list of enemies of the people of Donald Trump. I guess you're on that list too, aren't you, Gil?
Well, I don't know that I'm that important, but I'm trying.
Well, you're in the press, so that it's a pretty blanket indictment that Trump has issued. So, but how do you undo the incredible skill that guy has had? I mean, he's one of the stupidest and most dangerous and reckless and ill-informed and horrible and cruel people you could ever have in any office, let alone the presidency. But he has an amazing willpower, and he's been able to turn reality into unreality and get his people to accept his alternative reality. I mean, that's the part of it that's amazing, that somehow January the 6th was a love fest. So, I mean, how do you turn the tables on that? I'm not suggesting we need another sociopath on the left to counter Donald Trump, but where is that will coming from? And do you see anybody on our side, for the want of a better description, that has that kind of willpower?
Not at the moment. Not anyone who's been around as long as Trump. We have to remember Trump is a creature of reality TV. Trump is a creature of social media. He has been developing these kind of parasocial one-to-one relationships with his supporter base for decades. And he's beyond being a politician because he's literally a character from the TV who bled into politics. So that's his special power. But Trump is 78 years old, right? That typically, he eats a lot of McDonald's. Someone at that age with that health profile doesn't have a lot of time left on this earth. So we have to think about what comes after Trump, because I think the key now for the right wing and the authoritarians is to create someone who can take up the legacy of Trump and try to move it forward into the future. I'm not sure that there's anybody except Trump who appeals to his base in the same way. And I don't think you need someone on the left or on the Democratic side to be a Trump. I do think what Democrats need to do is get on a values-based message that speaks to the concerns of the majority of people in the country, and with a promise to completely disrupt and dismantle a system that is not working for most people. And I think the Democrats have become a little too attached to the idea of preserving the status quo and claiming incremental progress on things. And I don't think that's what a lot of people want to hear. I think a lot of people want to hear the Trump message or the Bernie Sanders message of the system is broken and we will fix it. We will change it fundamentally. And I think that to me was the overriding problem in this election, was that those people who are swing voters, you're never going to get the MAGA people. They're in the cult forever for the most part. Maybe one or two small percentage will get out of it. I saw there was a story about a woman who went to prison for January 6th, and she's come out of the cult after going through therapy and realized that it was wrong what she did and what Trump is. But those are rare cases. But I do think you need something that moves the majority of people. And that has to be a big message. It can't be incremental. It can't be a story told in percentages. It has to be a fundamental shift that makes people feel like there's a better future ahead. And so I think that, and it's more of a collective thing rather than just one individual. I do think we need someone who can stand up and be the leader, at least for now, because when you look out there, there's nobody really speaking to the majority of Democrats who feel disillusioned. And so no wonder that people feel so sad. And that's one of the reasons we put together the list, was to try to inspire others to create frameworks to give people hope and to keep people engaged. Because I've heard from a lot of people over the past few months, people saying, I'm not going to be involved in politics. I don't care. This doesn't affect my life. Let them have it. Let them learn their lesson. Let him do whatever he wants. And that's very dangerous kind of thinking. That's an example of what Timothy Snyder calls obeying in advance. So when you give in and you feel like nothing's possible and you can't do anything about it, you're obeying in advance. And what we know is, look, we've beaten Trump before. During the first term, we stopped him from doing a lot of things he tried to do and couldn't quite carry out. And so we have to continue in that spirit and never give up. The Republicans, you notice, there's a lot I disagree with them on, but they never give up. Even when they lose, they say they won. And so even though we've had a defeat in this election, doesn't mean it's over forever. The pendulum has a way of swinging the other way. And that's going to do a lot of the work here, but only if we're pushing that pendulum the other way.
Well, the right in this country, the Republicans, they don't care about inconsistencies and hypocrisies. They just have, a laser-like focus on power and gaining power. And the Democrats quite often would rather be righteous than effective. But I use the word flatlined in terms of where the Democrats are now. But the choice now is to be more like the Republicans, or Republican light, or reinvent themselves. And I think in many ways, you just mentioned Bernie Sanders. I mean, going back to 2016 or 2015, had Hillary Clinton taking him on as a VP, she certainly would have won. And we now learn that Trump was terrified that she would do that and he was very careful not to ever trash Bernie, because he knew that Bernie's people were also his people in many ways. So There was an example. And then, of course, you could even go back further to FDR's Second Bill of Rights from 1945, which are an extraordinary and simple and powerful manifesto, which could be rediscovered.
Definitely. Politics is about uniting a majority of people. And I think the Democrats have a much better platform for doing that. For some reason, they haven't been able to express that in a way that captures people when it comes to Donald Trump, who, is a supposed billionaire. Well, he is now because of his latest crypto scam, who people think is somehow going to do what's right for working people. And that's not going to happen. He's surrounded by billionaires. And I think the way I look at it going into the future of American politics is largely sorting between what is best for the small number of billionaires, who some of whom will be trillionaires soon in this world, and what's best for everybody else. And if Democrats can't find a way to articulate a message, an economic message, a moral message that accounts for this dynamic and that speaks to the interests of the majority of people without kowtowing to billionaires, because a lot of Democrats want that billionaire money too. And I can tell you a lot of people I know in Democratic politics are now going to work for all these tech billionaires who have brought about this terrible Trump second term on our country. So there's a lot of people who are comfortable no matter what happens. I think Democratic leaders have to be on the side of the uncomfortable and have to learn how to speak to the vast majority of people who are losing, no matter who wins, right? I think that's the feeling that a lot of people have in the working class, people who may not really like Trump, but for some reason bought into his propaganda because the Republicans are so much more effective at propaganda. And they've been reaching all of these people in ways that I think most Democratic communicators can't even perceive. So I do think that we have to do a better job of uniting the party. I've heard a lot of people too wanting to throw the left out, blaming the left for this defeat. And look, some people on the far left can be quite annoying with some of their things. But I don't think the far left lost this election. I think that the Democratic Party lost this election. There's many reasons why. I don't totally blame Kamala. I think she did the best with what she had. But we had a situation where the president wasn't able to function. Nobody would say it to the last minute, apparently. And we had a candidate plugged in at the last minute who had 100 days to try to make the case. So I don't think we should read too much into the result of this election. It was an unusual one. But we have to start planning for 2026 and after. And that's going to require energy and optimism. We've beaten Trump before, and we can beat him again. But if we give into defeatism and gloom, then he wins by default, and we cannot allow that to happen.
But a little while ago, Duran, you mentioned that Trump is not in the best health, and it's true that he could choke on a Big Mac at any moment. But then he would be replaced by somebody that's even, I think, in many ways more dangerous, J.D. Vance, who's plugged into the theocracy and the plutocracy, as Trump is, but a different kind of plutocracy, the Silicon Valley plutocracy, the one that we saw arrayed behind Trump in his inaugural speech in the Capitol Rotunda a couple of days ago. So they're a scary bunch, and I'm pretty sure you're familiar with them, are you not?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've written a lot about what I call the Nerd Reich over the past year, and these Silicon Valley guys who have now, with a sort of religious framing, decided to get very involved in our politics. And J.D. Vance is very much a creation of Peter Thiel, who's at the center of this whole thing. But I do think Vance is dangerous, but no one, including him, has the sort of level of charisma and power, media power, that Trump has been able to build up over decades. So I do think he's more beatable than Trump. Trump is his own thing. And I think that we're going to see over the next few years, these tech guys try to create something out of Vance that can carry the flag forward. I'm not sure he can pull it off. He will certainly try. But I think that Democrats need to be planning to create their own stable of leaders who can compete in that future election, because as we've seen, we're way far behind on what these guys are up to in terms of propaganda, media manipulation, and you add AI to that, and it's really going to accelerate beyond any of the old tactics or strategies. So while I do think Vance is dangerous, Trump is unique, and I think it's sort of going to be a jump ball in terms of who can rise up and be seen as the leader the United States needs after what will be a stressful and probably jolting era of the Trump second term. Who knows what it's going to be like when this is over? I mean, the guy's already 3 days before being sworn as president launches a meme coin and, filches billions of dollars from people. It's sort of unprecedented here. And I think that at some point people are going to get very suspicious of it. I think Trump's popularity is already underwater, his approval rating. And so there's a lot of work to do to really extend that. I think people are going to be pretty unhappy with this in a year or two, especially since Trump can't keep all of his fanciful promises. But in lieu of those promises, he's going to just be filling the airwaves with propaganda. And I think Democrats have to figure out some effective ways to project a vision for a better future, one that really speaks to the needs of the majority of Americans.
So just in the last couple of minutes then, Gil Duran, what we've been talking about so far is somewhat falling into that trap of wanting to be rescued by the man or the woman on a white horse. And it would seem to me that while we hope that there's somebody that can capture the population in the way that Trump has, with some authentic charisma as opposed to reality TV. I mean, in other words, somebody from the reality world as opposed to the unreality world. But surely in the meantime, without putting all your eggs in that basket, there has to be a grassroots revival, doesn't there? People have got to work together. In other words, it's got to be people power versus money power.
Oh, definitely. And, I said earlier, it needs to really be about collective action. We tend to have leaders who get the credit for things, but it's really the grassroots movements that put these leaders into power. You definitely need individuals who can win elections. That's important. But most of the changes that happen, most of the bad things that Trump was stopped from doing, it wasn't one person doing that. That was many different people working at many different levels in many different ways to stop him, using the law, using the media, using whatever tactics were available. And so I think we need to really operate and function at all levels. You need a grassroots movement that's optimistic and that's motivated and that feels that they can make a difference, that each of these individual people involved can make a difference. But at the same time, you need a party that's developing a message that's designed to appeal to what Americans really care about. And you need a stable of candidates to start competing now to figure out who's our best team to put forward when the time comes. I think Republicans tend to think in this strategic way. And I think Democrats are too busy fighting each other and trying to get to the top. And in the meantime, look what has happened here. So I think we're going to have to look in the mirror and think about who's the best person to be the leader. But that victory only comes if people on the grassroots level are motivated and organized and pushing. And a lot of politics happens at the local and state level. And that stuff's all super important too. And you often see Republicans playing on those levels, taking over school boards, taking over legislatures. And for all of the money and good will of the philanthropists on the Democratic side, it's not clear why nobody is funding strategies like that. The Republicans have had decades to plan all this out. They've created their entire alternate reality with their alternate media outlets. And in the meantime, the mainstream media, which some accuse of being liberal and which liberals accuse of not being liberal, is trying to both sides everything. And you don't have any effort you don't have a major effort on the Democratic or left side that can compete with all of these brainless MMA fighters who have suddenly become the most important voices in American politics. And it's very peculiar, but there's always time for a change. And hopefully we have learned some lessons from this and can, in the future, not make the same mistakes. Communication is very important. And politics never stops. We don't stop with an election. You have to continue to plan your next fight. That's what the Republicans do, and that's just the way it is.
Well, Gil Duran, I thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Gil Duran, who's a San Francisco journalist who previously served as editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee and the San Francisco Examiner. He currently writes the Frame Lab newsletter on Substack and regularly contributes to the San Francisco Chronicle and other publications. He served as press secretary for Kamala Harris when she was Attorney General of California. And he has an article with George Lakoff at Frame Lab, Woody's New Year's Resolutions and Ours. And we're going to take a B station break. We'll be back in a moment with an interview from February the 27th of 2025 with Brooke Harrington.
Put it there, boy, and we'll show these fascists what a couple of hillbillies can do. You may be surprised. People in this world are getting organized. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Brooke Harrington, a professor of economic sociology at Dartmouth College, a certified wealth manager, and an advisor to the OECD, the European Parliament, among other organizations. She's the author of several books, including the best-selling Capital Without Borders, and her latest book is Offshore, Stealth Wealth and the New Colonialism. And she has an article at the New York Times, Trump is like FDR, only in reverse. Welcome to Background Briefing, Brooke Harrington.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining us, Brooke. And one of the last public addresses that FDR made was offering up a second Bill of Rights. Are you familiar with the second Bill of Rights?
Is that the one with the 4 freedoms?
No, it is. I'll just quickly go through the list of the second Bill of Rights. The right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops and farms or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home and abroad. The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. So this is really a manifesto from 1945 on an American social democracy. And as you point out in your article, Trump and Musk are like the Antichrist, right? They're the opposite of social democracy. They're the wrecking crew of any even incipient social democracy, it would seem.
Yeah, the analogy occurred to me because I thought, when in American history have we seen anyone move so quickly on issues of public trust in government and institutions? And the analogy that occurred to me was FDR in the first 100 days. But of course, he was moving in the opposite direction to build trust and build institutions, whereas Musk and Doge are busy tearing it all down.
And of course, the budget that was passed last night in the House, again, tears down what little of our social safety net we have. They're just taking $880 billion out of Medicaid, which a lot of MAGA voters depend upon. So it's not even rational when you have Republicans in the thrall of Trump selling out their constituents in order to give massive tax breaks to billionaires.
It's very reminiscent, to be historical again, it's reminiscent of what was called the business plot or the Wall Street putsch of 1933, in which just as soon as FDR had begun to restabilize the US government and restabilize the economy just a little bit, immediately the richest men in America said, okay, that's enough. We're okay. We've got to get rid of this socialist institution builder, FDR. And so they tried to launch a coup against him, headed up by a Marine general named Smedley Butler. Fortunately, he was an honorable enough man and a true patriot to say, get lost, I'm not doing that. But, almost 100 years later, they finally succeeded.
Right, and Smedley Butler is a kind of general officer that Pete Hegseth is firing from the Pentagon.
Precisely.
So your article at the New York Times that I mentioned, which was also titled "Trust Was Once an American Superpower," it says that one of our country's greatest and least appreciated assets has been public faith and trust in a variety of highly complex systems staffed by experts whose names we will never know. In fact, high levels of trust used to be one of our superpowers in the United States, especially that meant trust in our government to operate with reasonable competence and stability and without the kind of corruption that has hobbled other societies. And you also go on to say that Transparency International ranked the United States among the top 20 countries in the world for the least amount of corruption in government. And now it's plunged those rankings to the lowest level ever. Now we're at the same level as the Bahamas, a famous money laundering hub. So this damage has been done radically by Trump and Musk. Of course, to some extent, Reagan also started this, did he not? This war on government, saying the government's not the solution, it's the problem. And Grover Norquist talked about shrinking it down and drowning it in the bathtub. But nothing's happened on the scale of what's happening now, surely, with Musk.
No, what Musk and Doge have done is, with a very predatory eye, look at a civic wealth that we have, and they figured out how to loot it. That's what I call the trust in government that still remained in America. It used to be very high until Vietnam. And then, Vietnam War, understandably, really undercut America's faith in government to tell the truth and to be competent. And then Ronald Reagan made that situation much worse by telling people that government was inherently something other than a set of institutions working by the people for the people, which is, of course, what it is. And then over long years, kind of like our physical infrastructure in the United States, a lot of our roads and bridges were built either during the New Deal by FDR, or they were built under Eisenhower or during the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson. And they've been crumbling ever since without proper maintenance. So too has civic faith in government. It's amazing we've done as well as we've had, given how little maintenance we've put into those things. But Trump and Musk came along and saw a teetering structure, and they said to themselves, we're going to push it over and loot it. And that's what they're doing.
So how much, though, do you think of what's going on now is performative? Because Trump is, of course, a reality TV star. And when he first launched his run for the presidency back in 2015, he came down the golden escalator at Trump Tower, and above him on the balconies were a group of hired extras. They weren't real American supporters. He hired them like you would hire a bunch of extras for a movie shot. So he's a sort of phony from day one. And I'm looking at some of the reporting now that's coming out about what Musk is doing. A lot of it doesn't make any sense. You cannot get the money that they need out of getting USAID and all these other small government agencies, putting them out of business. The only real pool of money that you could possibly get is in the Pentagon, and I doubt that they'll have any serious efforts there. And given what the House just passed last night on their budget to strip 1.5 trillion out of Medicare and food stamps, etc., that's not even going to make up for the massive tax cuts. So they'll blow out the deficit. And also they fired 6,700 employees from the IRS, which is the only part of the government that actually brings in revenues. So therefore you can't, when you talk about cutting government spending, the last thing you want to do is to stop the collection of revenues. So how much of this do you think is performative, given that the Musk's whole claims about all the money he's gotten back and now is exploding? It turns out that they count so-called cancellation of government contracts in the billions when in fact they're in the millions. So there's something phony about this. I mean, obviously it's a sleight of hand in the sense that nothing that they're going to do will offset how much they're going to give away to the richest people in this country.
I'm not that worried about the tax breaks, although that's plenty bad enough. The real destruction being done here is to democracy itself and to, things like air traffic control. That's not a giveaway to rich people. That's just wanton destruction of institutions staffed by experts whose names we'll never know, but who nonetheless make our lives possible in America. what's happening with Musk is much more sinister than tax giveaways or deregulation. Frankly, wealthy people in America solved both of those problems a long time ago. And that's why Musk and Bezos routinely go whole years without paying any income tax. And their companies do too, even though they're booking hundreds of millions, if not billions, in revenue. And they do so without breaking any laws. So it's very sad, but like the problem of billionaires not wanting to pay taxes, they've already won that fight, and they've largely won the fight against regulation. What Musk is doing that is very much not performative at all is he's burning down any sort of institutions that make the rest of our lives possible, which also might affect his ability to essentially run the government like a king. And you're right in the sense that Trump himself is largely a buffoon who blusters a lot. And, perhaps 80% of what he says and does is performative in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of real world concrete impact other than scaring the crap out of people or pleasing his base. But what Musk is doing is a completely different thing. He's deadly serious. And I understand what you're saying about the phoniness of the cuts he claims. You're right about that. But what he's doing is not at all performative in the sense that he's not blustering. He's not bluffing. He really is burning down these institutions, and they're not going to grow back like a blade of mown grass. People are losing their jobs right and left. They're going to lose their homes. And it's unlikely that they will come back. I mean, the many government officials who are much better placed than I to know about the feelings of some of these fired federal workers are saying, no, they're not going to come back, because why should they trust that this won't happen all over again if Musk wakes up on the wrong side of the bed one day? And that is dangerous.
Well, Brooke Harrington, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Brooke Harrington, who's a professor of economic sociology at Dartmouth College, a certified wealth manager, and an advisor to the OECD and the European Parliament, among other organizations. She is the author of several books, including the best-selling Capital Without Borders, and her latest book is Offshore, Stealth Wealth and the New Colonialism. And she has an article at the New York Times, Trump is like FDR, only in reverse. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And I'll be back tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
A shot rang out in the night, just when everything seemed right. Another headline written down in America. The guy that lived next door in 305 took the kids to the park and disappeared by 9:30. Who'll ever know how much she loved them so? That dark night alone in America. A quiet voice was singing something to me. An age-old song about the home of the brave in this land here of the free. One time, one night in America. Four small boys playing ball in the parking lot. A preacher, a teacher, and the other became a cop. A car skidded into the rain, making the last little one to say, one more light goes out.